Welcome back. Well, our final guest is someone who is at the centre of the Brexit drama, and what he decides to do and what he tells his MPs to do could prove decisive. So joining us now is the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
Welcome. Thank you.
Now, there are reports in the papers today that I just want to start off with saying that Labour is preparing to whip its MPs to support an amendment that would actually allow Theresa May's deal to go through on the condition that it's then put to a public vote. I mean, is that right?
No, we're not supporting Theresa May's deal at all because we think it's a blindfold Brexit which will actually do enormous damage to our economy. What our conference discussed last year was the question of having a referendum on future relationship with Europe, and what we want to do is put forward our views as well, which are the 5 points we've consistently put forward, and indeed I'm reaching out to MPs across all parties to discuss those at the moment. Indeed, I've been to Europe to discuss those with the EU, and so we would then favour a credible choice referendum after that.
So how are you going to make this happen? Because we've been talking a lot about the Peter Kyle amendment. There's, again, reports in the papers that this amendment is something that Labour could back. Is that not correct?
I had a very good discussion with Phil Wilson and Peter Kyle last week, and we went through what they're trying to do, which is make sure people do have a say in the final decision, and that we agree with and support. And they are drafting an amendment which will be tabled this week, and we will obviously decide on our whipping arrangements, but clearly we've had a very good discussion with them. But the key thing is actually Theresa May's deal has now been rejected twice by Parliament. Rumour has it she's bringing it back on Tuesday for a third time. If that fails, a fourth time after that. This is ridiculous. This thing has been defeated comprehensively, and she has got to recognise that we've got to do something different. Therefore, our proposals of a customs union, market access and guaranteeing rights and environmental and consumer protections are, I think, the credible ones that are serious, and that's what we're putting forward. And that's what I've, as I say, been to Brussels to discuss these with Michel Barnier and representatives of the Commission and the Parliament.
Sorry to keep going back to this, but it does feel as if that, you know, in the big Brexit machinations, the detail of these amendments is really important because it's where Brexit is being shaped. So are you going to be whipping in favour of the Peter Kyle amendment?
If the amendment is as I have just set out, then yes, we will be supporting it. But we obviously got to see the wording of it, and Peter and Phil are discussing that. We've had a very good, very constructive discussion in relationship with them, as indeed I've had constructive discussions with many MPs from all parties.
One of the quotes in today's papers really stood out for me. This is from Peter Kyle, and this is what he said of you and John McDonnell and your views around a second referendum. I've seen for myself how they have moved from inquisitiveness to enthusiasm. So are you enthusiastic about the prospect of a second referendum now?
Oh, I love the way he puts that. That's very nice. Yes, we had a good discussion, and yes, our conference voted on a comprehensive motion which is about all the issues related to Europe. We actually said our priority is to get a general election, but yes, we do support the principle.
So are you enthusiastic about a second referendum?
I'm enthusiastic about getting a deal with Europe which guarantees our future trading relationship and protects jobs and industries in this country. And I do think people should have a choice on that.
Because that feels quite different, doesn't it? You're enthusiastic about getting a deal, which would mean leaving the EU.
The priority.
So what do you want? Do you want to stay in or leave?
The priority is to make sure that we don't crash out on the 29th of March. The priority is to protect jobs and industries in this country. The priority is to make sure we have a future trading relationship and a choice, a real credible choice that the people can make on their future relationship with Europe. At the moment, we're heading for a cliff edge with all the problems that has for industry all over the country.
So
you saw the concerns of people in Ipswich.
What would the choice be in a referendum? Would it be Remain or Theresa May's deal? What would it be?
Well, the Parliament will obviously have to decide on the contents. We don't have a referendum law in Britain, so governments can't just call referenda. So therefore, that choice would be discussed by Parliament. But it would obviously have to be a credible choice that's real for both those that wanted to vote Leave or did vote Leave in 2016, as well as those that voted Remain.
Would you vote to Remain?
It depends what the choice is in front of us. If we've got a good deal in which we can have a dynamic relationship with Europe, which is all the trading relations and so on, then that might be a good way forward that unites the country. The principle has to be...
in that, you may vote to leave the EU?
It depends what the relationship is we've agreed in the future. That's why I've put forward all along the whole concept of a customs union with the European Union, which would give us a say in our relationship in the future. Listen, these things are very, very crucial of what we do, and that's why we are trying to reach out to ensure there can be a consensus which prevents a no-deal exit. And the disaster of this government's strategy is they didn't reach out for a consensus in the first place. They've run down the clock, and they continue running down the clock, hoping that they can force MPs to support a deal that clearly two-thirds of MPs don't want to support.
Well, let's just talk about, because I know obviously you're keen to have a go at Theresa May. That's your job as leader of the opposition. But I'm just keen to really focus on Labour's position as well. You're saying you're reaching out to MPs. You're writing to a cross-party group, aren't you, including some Conservatives. Who are you writing to, and what are you saying?
Well, what we've done is we've spoken to those in what's called the Norway Plus group or Europe 2.0 group. We've had informal discussions with large numbers of MPs. Keir Starmer and many others reach out all the time. The principal points we're putting forward are what I call the 5 pillars of the Labour proposal, which are the customs union, market access and protection of rights. We think that's a basis for discussion and negotiation. And interestingly, when we took these proposals to Brussels, they are alarmed at the way in which the British government's operating, and they were interested in the basis on which they could negotiate with us, because they do not want this country. I don't want this country to become...
The EU has agreed to Theresa May's withdrawal agreement.
They have agreed
what they want to do is for MPs to back that. I mean, they've said that numerous times.
They've agreed Theresa May's proposals, and they now recognise that these do not enjoy the support of the majority of MPs.
They've said numerous times that this is the deal that's on the table, that MPs
I know, but they've also said quite clearly that we have a credible view there that they would be prepared to negotiate. They will agree an extension to A50 if there is something credible on the table, and that credible would be a general election in Britain, which I think would be a very good idea, so the people of this country can decide who their government's going to be. And also to discuss a future relationship. What we're proposing is a serious relationship with Europe, so we don't end up doing sweetheart deals with the USA or becoming some kind of offshore tax haven. Now,
you mentioned there the kind of Norway Plus plan or Common Market 2.0 as something that you're having discussions on. What are the differences between that plan and Labour's plan? There are not many, are there?
No, there's not many, but there are quite important one that essentially Norway Plus would mean we would be taking but not contributing to rules and agreements, whereas our proposal is for a dedicated customs union with the EU, which would obviously give us the opportunity to negotiate it.
On the rules, though, I mean, the Norway plan is aligning with EU rules. You're also talking about what you refer to as dynamic alignment with EU rules. I mean, you'd have to ally with EU rules
what we've said
either way, wouldn't you?
It's a strange word, dynamic alignment, but what in reality it means is that we would not allow any of our rights and conditions to go below European levels, but we would want to go above them. For example, I think people should get full rights at work from day one of their employment. That is not an EU rule.
You can do that in Common Market 2.0 as well, can't you?
We could do that nationally in any event.
So what's the difference?
Well, the difference is that we wouldn't have any say on the trade relationship with Norway Plus, but with ours there would be a bespoke customs union with the EU.
So,
but there's actually a very
pretty limited.
Well, we had a very good discussion with the Norway Plus group, and as I say, I'm reaching out because I want us to reach a consensus, which means that we do protect jobs and trade with Europe, we do ensure that we have a serious and good relationship with Europe, and we don't do what Liam Fox spent the first year or so doing, which was threatening Europe with all kinds of sweetheart trade deals to undercut Europe.
So could you end up supporting the Common Market 2.0? Because they are very similar,
There would have to be some alterations to it, but that's why we've had a good discussion with them. And it was a very serious and very collegiate discussion.
I mean, I quite like the idea of Jeremy Corbyn, the scourge of the Conservative Party, having all these meetings with Conservative MPs, writing to Conservative
I can be very polite to anybody.
Are there any Conservative MPs that you particularly admire?
Well, I suppose I've known Kenneth Clarke for so long, and we've disagreed on so many things for so long. We actually personally get along.
The Thatcherite Cabinet Minister, Ken Clarke.
Well, you see, he and I didn't get along at all well when he was Health Secretary and issues like that. But I do think that he's been consistent with what he says.
OK. Now, I just want to... because
But also, politics should not always be about dislikes and so on of people. It's perfectly possible to have a constructive relationship with somebody, even if you don't agree with them.
Now, I'm just really trying to kind of get to the heart of Labour's position when it comes to Brexit, because we've spoken there about a second referendum, we've spoken there about trying to get a good deal. I mean, these are things that are so different. One of them involves leaving the EU, potentially, and the other one involves staying in the EU. So what's Labour's position? Is it to leave the EU or is it to stay in the EU?
Our manifesto said respect the result of the referendum. Our conference motion said respect the result of the referendum. Our conference motion also said we want the kind of relationship with the EU that I've outlined. Our preference would be, if the government cannot get its deal through Parliament, then there ought to be a general election. And indeed, in any normal situation, a government that's been so comprehensively defeated would now be resigning and have a general election.
So your preference is to leave the EU?
Our preference is to recognise the results of the referendum, and we're.
What does that mean? Recognise the result? I mean, everyone recognises the result.
There was a majority. There was a majority that voted no, but Labour is unique amongst the parties in that we are appealing to people who voted both Leave and Remain, because at the end of the day, it's the social issues facing this country, the poverty, the insecure work, the homelessness and the growing inequality that are crucial. That's what brings people together.
Do you want to leave the EU?
I want us to have a serious relationship with the EU. I would...
It's not really what I asked, though.
Well, no, I know it's not what you asked, but what I'm trying to help you say is that we want to have a relationship with the EU of the type I set out, and people will have a choice on that. But there will be a credible choice in any referendum that Labour proposes.
So do you want to leave the EU or not?
I've had many criticisms of the EU. I recognise many of the values of the EU. I would want to see it more accountable and more democratic, and that's was what I campaigned for in the referendum. But at the end of the day, it's about the trading relationship and the jobs that's so important.
Because I don't want to kind of keep going on about the point, but I do think it's quite important. I don't think it's just me who's confused either. I think we can just have a look. We were talking earlier about the film in Ipswich, which, of course, Labour took from the Conservatives very narrowly at the last election. I spoke to two women there, not previously Labour voters, but they backed you last time. They also voted to leave in the referendum. And this is what they said when it comes to your views on Europe. He keeps changing his views. I think it's very confusing. If there's another election, I'm not really sure who I'd vote for. I mean, they were worried, really, that you'd suddenly switch to backing a second referendum.
The party conference wanted to support the principle of the people having a choice. I'm the leader of the party. I must recognise what the party members and supporters want to do. And that is why we are putting forward the proposals we are, and why we think there ought to be a choice on how they're carried out in the future. It's
a bit of an issue for you, though, isn't it, electorally? Because really your path to power is through Leave supporting constituencies. We can just have a quick look to illustrate that. I mean, these are the top 20 Labour target seats, 40, apologies, I'm just being told of my Labour target seats of the election. And if we can just colour in the ones that voted Remain and Leave, so the blue ones are the Leave voting seats. I mean, if you back a second referendum, you're throwing away the next election, aren't you?
No, what you have to recognise is that within that, there are people that voted both Leave and Remain within the majority that the Conservatives got and the minority vote that Labour got in those constituencies. Surely what brings people together is the kind of society we want to be in the future, and that will be our message in the general election, about investment in left-behind communities, about understanding why people voted Leave, because they were so angry that their communities had seen no investment, no development, and many people relying on insecure work. Surely it's the social issues facing this country that are so important, and we have to form our relationship with Europe around that.
But that's going to matter, isn't it? What our relationship is with the EU is going to make a huge difference to all those incredibly important things you just spoke about.
Absolutely. That's why people voted Remain and Leave. Nobody voted to lose their job. Nobody voted to have reduction in food standards. Nobody voted to bring in chlorinated chicken from the USA.
So you're clearly keen to have an election, understandably. What are you going to do to bring that about? When are you going to call a confidence motion in the government?
We've had one confidence motion already. The government is apparently going to bring its proposals once again to Parliament this week. I suspect they'll be defeated again. The whole process they're doing is running down the clock. I think at that point a confidence motion would be appropriate. I think at that point we should say there has to be a general election so the people of this country can decide, do they want a Labour government investing in people's communities, dealing with inequality and justice and having a relationship with Europe that protects jobs and guarantees our trade for the future.
So when they lose, as many expect, the third meaningful vote on Brexit, well, that's the time you think
we'll obviously decide the exact moment, but quite obviously we don't have confidence in this government's ability, and indeed Parliament doesn't, because this government has got the record for the biggest defeats ever by a sitting government in Parliament.
I mean, one thing that we perhaps do know after the chaotic votes last week is that it looks likely that we're going to be seeing an extension. How long an extension do you think could be acceptable?
The extension that's being suggested is until the end of June, which is 3 months. It's tight, but I think it's possible to do what's necessary during that time.
Could you accept a longer extension?
Well, a longer extension has complications, legal complications concerning membership of the EU and European elections. And so the impression I got from the EU was that they were not keen on extending beyond on June. They would rather get it sorted, by the end of June, that is, they'd rather get it sorted.